Welcome to the Small Giants Virtual Workshop.
I'm really excited to introduce our speaker and facilitator today, Zach Mercurio. Zach is an expert in specifically the area of purpose and meaning and how that can impact our organizations and our lives. So it's a great fit with the Small Giants community and a lot of the Small Giants leaders whose faces I see right now, which is wonderful. So he helps organizations and individuals. I see maybe a couple of individuals who can speak directly to that on the call today, but he helps them understand how purpose and meaning create thriving organizations and lives. So Zach, welcome. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks everybody for being here and taking some time to be here. I'm just going to jump right in. So like Rachel said, I research purposeful leadership and meaningful work. I do that in the Center for Meaning and Purpose at Colorado State University. And I also spend the other half of my time working with mostly mid-sized, small to mid-sized businesses on building and structuring and designing culture to elicit meaningfulness, which is the key driver of motivation. And so that's what I do, but I need to take you back to me 3 months ago. I mean, this has been a challenging time. So I just wanted to share with you my personal story. And if you think about this, my business is to be with organizations, with human beings in large rooms, which is not very pandemic resistant. And if you go back 3 months ago on a Friday afternoon in about 4 hours, I lost about 60% of my engagements in business for a year. And I remember I was sitting in my kids' daycare parking lot, getting all of the canceled contracts on my phone. There was like 4 that came in. And I started panicking, right? I started reacting on instinct, on fear. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? I started scrambling. And meanwhile, 30 minutes goes by and my kids are still in daycare and I didn't pick them up yet. I was just sitting there like blanked out. And I go in to my 2-year-old's room, daycare room, and he comes running up to me, and I think he gave me what I think was an extra long hug that day. And he's like, Daddy, let me show you my finger painting. He made a finger painting of a frog. It was really just a green blob. And I stopped, and I was just in that moment, I was thinking like, he doesn't care about my lost revenue. He doesn't care about the keynotes that were canceled. Right? He cares that I was there, that I was being there for him in that moment. And it made me really reflect on leadership and how, especially in change, especially in crisis, we have a tendency to react to change and react to crisis and not respond to change and respond to crisis. I was reacting on instinct. Our instincts try to keep us surviving. And so my fear, my anxiety narrowed my attention to myself to the point where time didn't exist. I lost track of time. I want to start talking today about responding to crisis and responding to change and being able to choose a response that is productive, that is purposeful, and that helps to really think about those ways of being instead of just ways of doing. You know, I have a lot of clients that have been telling me, Zach, what do I need to do? What should I do now? And that's an instinctual reaction, and it's normal, it's natural. And I often have stopped them and I'm saying, don't ask like, what do you need to do next? I mean, ask who needs you to get through this? Who needs you to get through this first? Recentering on that purpose, that will, because to survive, we need a will to survive. And positive and purposeful leaders tend to cultivate that will by unleashing positive resources to respond. And so we're going to primarily be playing in this space between when a change happens, when something happens to us, and how as leaders do we respond in a way that is life-giving and regenerating. And Viktor Frankl, he was a concentration camp prisoner and author of Man's Search for Meaning. And he says in some of the most horrific human conditions imaginable, he said there's between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response, and in our response lies our growth and our freedom. Don't let a crisis take away that freedom that we have as leaders to create and craft a positive and life-giving response to change. And we're going to go through some practices of that. So what do we know in the research? How do positive and purposeful leaders tend to respond to change? Well, when you look at, Nancy Cohen's work, for example, she's a Harvard historian, and she studied leaders in crisis really for the last century of what leaders do. And what they tend to do is tend to focus on the purpose. They reinstill who needs you to survive this, who needs you to get through. Why does it matter that this change is happening? How will this change help deliver this reason for being? The positive, so it's not that this is really important. It's not that I'm saying everything is great, like puppies and rainbows. That's not what I mean by positive. Positive is a lens through which we see situations. So the positive means, how do we unlock what's good about the people around us, what's best about the people around us, our strengths, to then mobilize those strengths to change. And then finally, the possible. What will it be like when we move through? Who will we become? What will we be able to do? What's that single, hopeful, unifying vision for the future? I want to make another distinction before I go on. There's a big difference between change management and change leadership. In leadership training, if any of you have ever been trained to be a leader, you have, because you're in this community. But when we're thinking about being a leader, we tend to obsess and focus on change management. What do we do? How do we do it? Are the systems in place to get it done? Flow charts, projections, all of the stuff that, because you're a successful business owner and you're in this webinar, you know how to do. What we tend to not focus on as much is change leadership, which is cultivating the human energy to do what we need to do. I often say, like, a technical skill without the energy to use it is useless. Positive and purposeful leaders cultivate the energy amongst their organization that they need to change, to do all of the things that they need to do. So oftentimes when we react on instinct, we focus on what do we need to do. And I want to focus more today on change leadership. How do we cultivate the energy to do what we need to do and thrive well? So we are going to do a couple of things today. We're going to do some breakouts. So this is going to be interactive, because you hold all of the resources that you need to lead through change well already. There's nothing that I have that you don't have right now. Like, I'm not going to give you some magic resource. You hold them. I'm hopeful to create the space to liberate those resources, those positive things that can help you change. So you're going to go into a breakout session. And what I want you to do is think about a change that you didn't choose. So this is something that happened to you in your life, and it either had a positive outcome or you made it through. Now, this last one, you made it through. You did make it through because you're on this call right now. And then I want you to think about, what did you do to positively respond to and navigate the change? And then what strengths or personality traits did you use to navigate that change well? So Rachel and Hemsa will break you out, and you'll have about 5 minutes to think about that change that you didn't choose, but you made it through. What did you lean on to do that?
Perfect. So you're going to see just a little alert from Zoom that says join breakout room. So when that pops up, go ahead and click on that. For those of you who don't have your cameras on, if you're a little bit shy, joining the breakout room would be a great time to turn your camera on. We'll see you all in about 5 minutes.
That was interesting for you all. What I'd like for you to do is, if one person from each group, or if you can just do this generally, but one person from each group, and you didn't decide this earlier, so you might all just chime in, which is good. I just want you to write a few words that describe what you heard in terms of what people leaned on to move through those changes. For example, I'll start, when I think of my change, purpose, and maybe you all can put in some words that came up for you in that conversation. What did you lean on? What did you do? Trust, good. Thanks, Travis. Awareness, great. What else? How about someone else? All right, optimism, faith.
Decision-making skills.
Oh,
faith.
Thanks, Denise. Decision-making skills, good. resiliency,
Leave
adaptability,
your job
control
and
what I can control.
leave your job and start a company.
Leave your job and start a company so that you drive.
All three of us, same story.
Really? Wow. So drive to move ahead, creativity, right? Problem solving, great. So most of you, I don't see anybody say that they, hunkered down, hunkered down and thought about the negative things that could happen, right? We typically don't do that when we respond to change well. And what we know in the research is there are few things that people do and lean on really well when they change well. And this is called positive psychological capital. And these are the things that people tend to have when they're thriving. And the first is hope. And hope is not some fluffy idea, but it's really this idea that this belief that this can get better. So like John said, go in and start a business, something can be better. It's hope for the future, as many of you talked about. The second is efficacy. This is the belief that I can do this. Travis wrote, control what I can control. There's two words in there that's really powerful, which is I can. So the belief that I can do this, the belief that we can do this at an organizational level. Resilience. And resilience, you don't get resilience, as you all know, in a webinar. You get resilience because you face challenges. I often say that we don't thrive despite our challenges. We thrive precisely because of our challenges and what we learn through those challenges. And resilience is really liberating the positive resources that you already have to change. So it's this, I've made it here, so I already have what it takes to make it through. This is really important at an organizational level as well. The organization already has strengths that can be liberated and leaned upon as leaders to help you make it through. And that collective belief comes from reflecting back on those challenges and understanding what those strengths are. And then optimism. I think there was 3 in a row here of optimism. And again, optimism is not the blind idea that everything's great. It's the belief that the future will be and could be better. Now, these 3 things over years of studying people are common with people who thrive. And organizations are individuals who organize. So when we look at organizations, these things are central, and especially central in change scenarios. So the big question is, as we go through some of these responses to change from a positive and purposeful perspective, we're really asking this question: how can we build this on our teams to be able to have the energy and resources to do the change? How can we build positive psychological capital to thrive in change, and especially in response to crisis? So before we get into the 3 main areas today, I just want to take a step back and think about why we would focus on the positive. And again, positive does not mean everything's great. It's the bias through which we view everything. We think in possibilities, not necessarily in problems. We think of what's not, how do we fix people, but how do we bring out what's best in them? That's what I mean by positive. And what you see on the screen right here is actually a sunflower in late summer in Colorado. And if you notice what it's doing, it's a time-lapse video, and it shows the sunflower following the sun from the moment it rises on the horizon in the morning until the afternoon. And then what's really interesting about this is that sunflower actually resets itself at night to where the sun is going to come up on the horizon. This is a key principle of heliotropism. It's the tendency for all living things to move toward positive energy and away from negative energy, to move toward what is life-giving and regenerative and away from that which is life-extracting. So we are wired to be drawn towards positive regenerative energy as human beings and organizations, and away from extracting energy. And this is really a central tenet to understand, especially when working with change or in crisis. We know that the human brain is actually optimized when they experience positive emotions. This is a brain scan from a study from Charles Lim. He's a medical doctor at Duke University. He looked at jazz musicians in an fMRI machine, and he had them improvise a piece of music. And one group, he had them improvise a piece of music while looking at a face that was smiling. The other group had them look at a face that was not smiling. And the other one was looking at a face that was actually frowning, the negative. And if you look at this positive brain scan here, and this has been replicated over time, what they found is this area of the brain called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is where we make decisions and plan for the future and actually execute on what we're doing. And what he found was that those areas, when we experience positive emotions, actually become better. So the key is that we're optimized when we're around positive, regenerative energy. This is important because when we look at change, and if you go back to my story of I was experiencing change in that parking lot with my kids' daycare, we tend to focus on our comfort, like how do I preserve my comfort? How do I get through this? I was thinking to myself, oh, why are these clients canceling these engagements? We have externally directed expectations. We tend to try to preserve what we have. We focus on our expertise and we try to solve problems. And one of the byproducts of that is we experience negative emotions, which actually send us down a downward spiral and deplete the resources that we need to continue on. And a positive response to change is instead of being comfort-centered, we're purpose-centered. Instead of asking, how do we get through this? We ask, who needs us to get through this? We think about others and how we can compel others and serve others. We are more internally directed. Who am I being right now? Instead of just what am I doing? Thinking in possibility instead of problems. And how will we learn through this? And think about the possibilities of getting through this. And when we enact some of these positive responses to change, we generate positive emotions. And research also indicates that emotions can go viral in organizations. It's called emotional contagion. So when somebody experiences happiness, we find that other people almost 3 degrees away from that person can actually experience, their brains can experience the same level of happiness as they do. And what happens is as people in the organization sort of catch on to the positive, they start actually optimizing their resources they need to get the change done. And when we react negatively, like anger, fear, worry, these serve the attention for us to survive. If we focus our attention on survival from our mindset standpoint and also our bodies biologically. And what that does is we don't communicate as well with others. We don't look up and look outward. And we actually deplete the very resources we need to change well. So joy, gratitude, hope, pride, inspiration, these things expand our attention outward. We look for who we can help. We create better transformative relationships and collaborations and build the resources that we need to actually respond to the thing that was causing the negative emotion in the first place. One of the first things that I did to get out of that spiral, I was in a negative spiral, was I stopped and I just asked, like, who can I help with what I have right now? And so I started really digging into the local business community. I was doing a lot of webinars, and so many opportunities came out of that question of who can I help right now? Networks that I've never been a part of before. So there was a lot of good things that came out of it, but I had to shift and break out of that negative spiral. And so when we experience positive emotions, it's called broadening our attention to build the resources that we need to continue to thrive and to have those positive resources to respond to the change well. So just to recap before we get into the 3 areas, focusing on the positive enables us to liberate the positive resources we need to be able to respond to the challenge well. And that's what we mean by change leadership. So there are 3 areas that we're going to go over, and I'm going to go over some practices for each of these. Reinstilling the purpose, liberating the positive resources, and then how do we envision what's possible? So let's start with the purpose. I think that you all, because you're in this community, are very well acquainted with this idea of purpose. But in a change setting, what it really does is it compels us to ask this question. Instead of how will I get through this or how will we get through this, first ask who needs me or who needs us to get through this. When we focus on the people that inevitably are affected and count on us as businesses, we generate the motivation, the energy to structure a response to change that keeps them at the forefront. What typically happens in organizations, and I've seen with some of my clients and even with myself, and it's natural, is that a lot of us, especially if you're in this community, we have a tightly coupled what in our why. Like our purpose is pretty clear. The value we provide others is clear. It's tightly coupled with what we do. But then oftentimes when an external pressure comes in, we can be very tempted to continue focusing on the what. So I got to handle this what. I got to do this thing. I got to handle this challenge. I got to meet payroll. And all along, as we're focusing on these very real pressures, they're real, they're important to focus on. But at the same time, we dilute our attention from our why, the very purpose, the very will we need to survive. I often say that to survive, we need a will to survive. And that will is our contribution that we want to make. So how do we bring that why into our response to make the response better? And so I just want to give you an idea of how this works, especially in difficulty. I don't know if anybody's a running fan. I'm a fan of watching other people run. I get bored driving 26 miles, so I can't imagine running a marathon. But this is Desiree Linden. She's the women's winner of the Boston Marathon in 2018. If you look at this photo here, you'll actually see the raindrops in the photo. This is in Boston, 40 degrees, windy, rainy, really difficult conditions. And her story gives us a profound example of what happens in difficulty. The cameras caught her going off the course and getting sick, and her legs were hurting, and she came back on the course, and she realized she was about to end the race, in the next few miles. But she stopped and she looked at this elite group of runners that was in the front of the group, and she went up to them and said, "Hey, what do you need? Let me know what you need from me. I'm about to quit at about mile 10. I'll draft for you. I'll block the wind for you. Whatever you need, let me know." She said in a post-race interview with Runner's World magazine that after she stopped thinking about her difficult circumstance and started thinking about her impact on others, she miraculously got her legs back. She went on to win the Boston Marathon. She was really disturbed by this because running is like a predictive science. You know what you put into your body and what it will do. And she said in her 25 years of training, she's never experienced what she experienced when she started thinking about her contribution. And neuroscientists find that we actually become better, optimized through neurotransmitters called dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. These are the things that control for mood, movement, and motivation when we think about our contribution. Those are the very things that we need for change. And so how do we get our people to think about that bigger reason for being? And the result is increased resilience. And a purpose has been found to predict resilience and grit. Angela Duckworth in the book Grit writes about, in a long, wide-ranging study, writes about having that bigger other-centered purpose is key to generating resilience to continue on. That pleasure line is everything's going well, everything's going great, and that typically doesn't correlate to resilience. So your purpose. Why do you exist? How do you impact your stakeholders, the people around you? This is the statement template that I use. I'm sure that you've gone through this already here, but what resources do you have? Who do you serve? And what will people be able to think, feel, be, do, or have as a result of you? For example, when I fill this in, my purpose is to help people to realize their own significance, to realize they matter. So keep in mind your purpose as we go through this next reflection exercise. And as you're thinking about change and responding to this crisis, that'll be a good point to frame your response on. And I want to just share one of my favorite examples of an outward display of purpose in this crisis. This is a photo from Southwest Airlines. And if you're an airline and you want to convey that you're doing okay and successful, it's probably not a great idea to post photos of completely empty airplanes. But Southwest, as you know, their purpose is to democratize the skies, to provide access to air travel across the socioeconomic spectrum. And they posted this picture, and right in the front there, if you see at the front of this photo, you'll see one person there. And they write in their caption that that person is a critical care pulmonologist that was traveling to volunteer in California. What this does is it's an example of a symbol that unites a stakeholder world and reminds people of why the work matters, why it's important to move through this. And so showing people the purpose and giving them a bigger idea of the bigger purpose is powerful. And then the second practice here is showing people their purpose. So Ernest Shackleton, when the Endurance was stranded in ice, one of the first things that he did when people are at the brink of death is he went around and made sure everybody kept doing their regular tasks, swabbing the decks. Scientists were taking samples. And the reason why he did that was so that people knew that the little mundane routine things that they did served this bigger purpose and would ultimately help them survive. So make sure that you give people that direction. You remind them why they and their work matters and their tasks matter right now to the broader mission and moving through whatever change it is. And it can be very powerful. So what I want to do now is this is going to be kind of a silent sort of reflection for you to think about purpose in a change. And you can think about a change, this change, or a change that has resulted from this COVID-19 crisis on your business. You could also think about a change you're trying to lead right now that's maybe unrelated. And what I want you to do is just write down who needs you to thrive through this change. And I want you to list 3 people and their names of who needs you to thrive. And then in what 3 ways will moving through this change help you or your company better deliver your purpose? So take a few minutes. We're just going to take 3 minutes for you to write this down for yourself right now, silent reflection. And then I'll bring people back and then I'll ask a couple of you to share what your responses are. So who needs you to thrive through this change? Who relies on you or your organization? And list 3 people and try to be specific. Like think about like their faces, who they are, name them. And then in this question, in what 3 ways will moving through this change well help you to better deliver your or the organization's purpose? And Steve asked, does it have to be an organizational change? Is a life change okay? Yes. I mean, this is really translatable to individuals as well when we think about change. So either is good for right now. Let's take a few minutes and I'll be quiet and let you all reflect on this. All right. Does anybody want to share what it was like to think about those people or their responses here? So you can just unmute yourself and share. It doesn't have to be in the chat.
I'm going to go back to the gallery view if that's okay, Zach, so you can see everybody.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, cool. Let's maybe hear from 2 people.
Who'd be willing to share?
Just raise your hand. Yeah.
I can start. Hey, Zach.
Hey, what's up?
So the people who need me to thrive through this particular change as I'm going through it, one is my 16-year-old daughter, partly because she needs a role model in how to do this for herself and what that looks like as she's going through her own big, huge changes right now. Like teenagers in online schooling is really different. The second piece is one of the solopreneurs I work with in terms of the larger, broader piece of bringing this to how are we helping teach people with the nonprofit I run how to identify and manage this process. And I think the third one is I need me to get through this more than anything else, if for nothing other than to being able to say, yep, can do this. Whole world turns upside down. I'm an extrovert trapped at home, all those things like, really being able to focus on that. For me, I need me to get through this.
Yeah, there was that, that in keeping that at the top of your mind as the lens through which you see even a day or your regular tasks of approaching this task will help me to be a role model during this time, or will help me to get through this. I was doing this workshop, and a woman was a cancer survivor, and that first question, she had said that every day she would think about her kids. Like, that's why she wanted to get through this. Her purpose is to be there for those kids, right? And she said that every time she got started feeling sick, she's like, I'm feeling sick so that I can be there for my kids. And I'm doing this so that is incredibly powerful to create the energy that we need. So thanks. How about one other person? I appreciate you jumping in. It's good to see you, by the way.
I'll go next, Zach.
Yeah, go for it. Who's that?
Ron Chambers.
Ron. Yeah, go for it.
Well, I'm kind of like Jana. I think my family really needs me to get through this, because I'm really the sole, hate to use the word breadwinner, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And that's one, because I just have to be strong to try to help them stay strong. I have a team of other representatives that I feel responsible to leading by example always. So I feel like I have to show strength and have faith and belief in that, tomorrow will be better. And we just, we persevere through this together. And on the other side of it, we'll all be stronger and better because of it. We'll have we'll be more resilient, I think, less likely to give up on our goals. I think we'll be wiser. We'll make better decisions because of this, particularly maybe with money, and resources. And then the last thing I think is that it's going to help me be more compassionate. I think I am already, but I feel more compassion and understanding right now for people in general. So I feel like it's going to make me become a better servant leader and just a better, sounds hokey, but fellow man, with people who need help.
Yeah, sometimes the things that sound hokey are actually the things that are most real, right? Like I say, the cheesiest things usually are the most real for humans. Ron, I'm curious, have you told your team those last few things? Like, this is helping me be more compassionate?
I have not, because I've been focused on, you had the 2 lines.
Yeah.
I've been focusing on the the task at hand kind of side of it, but I am certainly going to share it with them now.
I think that was my first charge to everybody here as a practice is to go share those things, like those 3 ways that'll make you better moving through this. Ask your people to share those things too. Like, as you're talking, I don't even know you and your business, but I'm kind of getting like, oh man, yeah, Ron, like I want to be in your thing, like, right? Because I'm learning how to be more compassionate. So telling people that, showing people that is really powerful. So thanks, Ron. I'm going to move ahead and just give you some practices that I've been using with clients around this area of purpose. And then we'll move into talking about strengths today, because I know you all took that strengths assessment, or if you didn't, it's okay. We'll allow you to have that space to talk about these strengths. But a couple of the things that are powerful with regard to the purpose conversation is, like that Southwest example, finding some sort of symbol to remind your people that while this is a tough time, there's a bigger reason to make it through it. That it doesn't have to be a marketing symbol or social media post, but it can be something. It can be a customer story, a user story, your own story, that it's helping you to be more compassionate. I was working with a small hospital, a rural hospital, right before the pandemic hit, and they were just about to transition to all electronic medical records. And the pandemic hit. You can imagine, I mean, it would be so easy to go into a negative spiral. But we spent a lot of time, even though it doesn't seem logical, of sitting and talking about who needs us to make it through this. And we actually brought in patients to tell their story and to start telling the story about how the hospital benefited their life. And it was very powerful. So find a symbol to unify people. Meet with the team you serve and show them how their daily work matters. Show them how what they're doing matters to getting through this. walk them through how these everyday tasks of continuing to do what they do connect to the bigger objectives that enable this bigger purpose to happen. And that will be critical for the team. I mean, have a virtual meeting with people where you talk about this purpose and reinstill that purpose. And one of the things that is powerful is if you can involve your stakeholders, even your customers, in that conversation, it's very powerful to reorient people in that way. And then the other practice is those things that you wrote down, share those with your team. And that goes an incredibly long way. You know, with the hospital I was working with, the CEO was trying to put on this image that everything's going to be fine. And it wasn't jiving well with the front line, right? I mean, people know. I mean, be honest about the struggle. And we had to say, hey, when we make it through this, we'll be able to say that we weathered a pandemic and we implemented an electronic medical record system for our patients. And that message is so much more powerful than, you know, it's going to be fine. So the next area is the positive. So focusing on the purpose and then focusing on the positive. And I love this Winston Churchill quote, you know, we shall not fail, which we shall not weaken or tire, neither the sudden shock of battle. He was honest, but at the same time, he cultivated credible hope, nor the long drawn trials of vigilance and exertion will wear us down. Give us the tools and we will finish the job. So positive leaders unlock those positive tools to get the job done. Now, the assessment that you took, that helps you to identify what your strengths are in change and in turbulence. And what this comes from is research with over 450 organizations on traits that people had and leaders had when change was successful. The first one is resourcefulness. So if you're someone who is able to find what you need to overcome a problem, you just know who to go to and what to get and what information you need, you're probably resourceful. Adaptability is your ability to flex with different things that come up. Adventurousness is you're willing to just be in the unknown. You actually like and thrive in the unknown. Optimism is that belief that things will get better, and you tend to have that naturally. Passion is the energy just to keep going, that internal motivation that you get up every day and you have that energy. And then tolerance for ambiguity, which is I feel like comfortable with ambiguity. You know, people keep telling me, Zach, these are uncertain times. And I'm like, there was never certain times. Like there's no such thing as certainty. What this has revealed is the frailty of our illusions of certainty. So how do we develop a comfort in ambiguity? Now, we all have different levels of these things. I think between 22 and 26 is considered good. I scored really low on optimism because I'm a critical thinker. That's not bad. That just shows me who I need to help during change. Like I need that. So the idea is we need a well-roundedness of these, whether it's ourselves or the people around us. So what I want you to do is we're going to break out for 5 more minutes before we close with some other work around strengths and the positive. And I want you to take a look at your assessment results and talk about which change strengths have you used to respond to this change and which haven't you used, and what's one opportunity for you to use them now. And then maybe think of, as you look at the lower scores, and I say lower because it's not low, it's relative. When you look at the lower scores, who might you around you rely on or ask for help that may be able to complement that lower score in this change? So why don't we start with just those 2 questions and think about maybe like a minute or 2 per person. What change strengths have you used to respond? Which haven't you used? And what's one opportunity for you to use them now? And who might you rely on for help? So I'll let Hemsa and Rachel break you out. And then in just 5 minutes, we'll come back and finish up with some practices in this area. All right, everybody. Thanks for talking. Hemsa said you didn't want to come back, it looked like, which is great. So I'm glad you were talking about this. This is a powerful, right there is a powerful conversation to have with your team. What are your strengths in change? Ask people how they think they can help. And it's really powerful. The last question we didn't get to, because I meant to put this as a challenge for you all, is in the worksheet that Rachel linked to in the chat at the beginning. You'll see in this area of the plan, there's a part for a role declaration. I'm really big on commitments, that whenever there's a change, that people should make a commitment to the role they will play in the change using their strengths. I call these like my change role commitment. And so like if your strength is optimism, you can say during this change, I will commit to reminding people about the positive future. And it's just really powerful to have your team create these role declarations, which are very powerful. So what role will you commit to playing in the change? That's one really high leverage practice that you can use, that we used with that hospital. Like, I will commit to being resourceful. And then if a supervisor and someone's not in the change, they're not being resourceful, they're not using their strengths, you have something productive to go back to. Instead of saying, hey, we need you to get on board, you can say, I need you to use your resourcefulness on this. It's a completely different feel, and it's a game changer. The second area here is now, how do you do this for others? So how do you use and know others' strengths? One of the bravest things a leader can do is ask for help. You know, the last thing that we need to do in crisis is to hunker down. It's often our instinct, but to open our attention up to the wisdom of our stakeholders and the people around us and their strengths is incredibly powerful. And telling the truth about what you're struggling with, about your problems, and then asking people to use their strengths to help you is very powerful. So a couple of tools that you might use here before we close out today. Use this change readiness assessment or some version of it with your team. I mean, you could even ask, you could get your team together virtually, in person. You could get your family together and say, when have we gone through a change before, and how did we make it through it? How did you make it through it? What are those strengths? And you can say, this is what we need from you in this change. We need these strengths. It's a very empowering message. The second piece is, I was working with a company leader, and they would tell me about all of their problems, and I would ask them, well, have you asked your people to help you? And it's just not, as leaders, especially business leaders, it's not our natural thing. We want to figure it all out and fix it, but list all of the problems that are keeping you up at night. Like Ron, I thought his framing was really great there. List all the problems that keeping you up at night. Have a meeting with your team, tell them those challenges, and identify which ones are high impact, high priority, and just say, this is what keeps me up at night. I need help. What ideas do you all have? This is a really tough story, but I had a client here that actually had to lay people off. We brought the people that they were laying people off and asked them how we should do it. How we should do this that's aligned with our values. And it allowed them to be part of this process that would negatively affect them. So I was on a webinar and I was telling that story recently, and someone said that's radical. And I don't think it's radical. I think it's just human, of bringing people in. Schedule an open meeting with your entire stakeholder group. You could do this via Zoom right now or Facebook Live. Reemphasize your purpose. Tell them the challenges that you have and why you need their input as a stakeholder group to move on. It can be powerful. And then do one-on-one check-ins. If it's for 15 minutes, ask your people how they're feeling. And there's a difference between how are you and how are you. So really ask them how they're feeling. Let them know how you're feeling. And then ask them how they think they can help. Go all the way down to the front line in your organization. Ask them, how can you help during this time? And listen. And once you do that, you create that energy and those upward spirals. And this final piece is the call to action I'm going to leave you all with is, you may have been inundated like me with what's not happening, with what we're not able to do anymore. And I think we really need leaders, especially in organizations that supply jobs and help our economies to flourish. We need people to show us what's possible, to show people what's possible through this. One of the most striking things about Martin Luther King is that in the midst of horrific violence against people who look like him, he was able to articulate, very detailed, a dream, his vision for the future. If we overcome this moment, what will it be like? What will it feel like? Who will we be able to become? Ron said, I'll become more compassionate through this. I mean, that is compelling leadership. And so I've given you this framework, and I invite you to have this conversation with your team or your family or your friend group or whoever you're struggling with through a change. And just say, when we make it through it, how will we and the people we serve feel? How will we feel? when we make it through this? Who will we become, and what will we be able to do now? I call this a 3-pillar approach to visioning. What would it feel like? Who would we need to be? And then what will we need to do? So we can actually see this vision in tangible behaviors. And the Martin Luther King quote is a great example. I have a dream that my 4 little children, very specifically, will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. That is specific, that is real, that is hopeful in a time where there are people marching behind this group that wanted him dead. That's leadership, and that's positive and purposeful leadership. So again, how do we respond to change? Focus on the purpose, cultivate the positive resources, and envision what's possible. And at the end of the day, people won't remember your spreadsheets, flowcharts, and projections as much as those things are so important. And we need results and profit to enable purpose, and they're not mutually exclusive. But they're going to remember you for your empathy. Ron, they're going to remember you for your compassion. They're going to remember you for your vision. And so focusing on those things are powerful. And if you'd like to learn more, I do have a newsletter that I write on this. You can text Zach to 55444 if you want to learn more. But thank you, Small Giants, for having me. And I'll turn it back over to Hemsa and Rachel.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, we'll do our little Zoom applause. That's perfect. Thank you, Zach. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I think it's clear that we're just scratching the surface here. I think we could have all talked about this for a lot longer. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, well, that's it for this one. Check out more Small Giants workshops at smallgiants.org.